Hi, everybody. So we're several days into our self-quarantine, but God is still good, and there's definitely a lot of exciting things that are going on around us, not just maybe where you're at. And so here's what we want to put our faith in, is that God has something hidden in these moments that we don't find completely comfortable. Can you believe that with me? Can you explore that out and see if that's true? And that's what I want to talk to you about today is, when you're in a place that you don't want to be, maybe it's a fearful place. Maybe it's just not a fun place. But does God have something there? And will he actually lead us to and through those places? So I just want to talk to you about that and talk to you about that from my own personal experience. What do you do when you hit a moment where fear just sort of kind of comes upon you? And very often it almost feels like it goes through me. I don't know what you experience, but I'll experience it like that. And I had one of those moments this morning. And I just started thinking. I actually probably started feeling before I started thinking, just possibilities of what might happen. And this doesn't happen to me a whole lot, but I just got hit with fear, and it seemed to almost pass through me, almost like a spiritual thing. And then I started to process it with the Lord. But I started to think of how often this has happened to me in my life, and probably the most consistent place that I've kind of been hit with these waves of fear has been in preaching, in public speaking. Many of you know this, but I have a fear of public speaking. And people will say, no, you don't. I know what that looks like, and you don't have it. But you're not in my skin, and so you don't know what you're talking about. A fear of public speaking is a lot like a fear of heights. If you have a fear of heights and you get somewhere really tall, you start climbing a tall ladder, maybe you're in a stadium and you're going to those top seats, there's a point where you'll get to where a vertigo will kind of hit you. You'll sort of spin just a little bit, and then this wave of fear will go through you. For years, I've encountered that when I'm preaching in front of everybody. And what I've learned is that it's the emotion of fear is not something to worry about. It's how you respond to it. And so there's a great man named John Wayne, and I think he's got something productive to offer here. But he said, courage is nothing but fear that's put on its boots. And I think that's really true. So I wanted to read you a couple of scriptures today. One is incredibly familiar, and if you haven't committed it to memory, you really should. This is a slightly different translation than what I'm used to, but this is Psalm 23. And it's talking about how we're walking with God. He's our shepherd. He's looking after us. And it says, as a matter of statement of faith, that he guides me along the right paths. Meaning that if Jesus is your good shepherd, he's guiding you on the right paths. And then he says his reasoning, for his name's sake. In other words, that his name stays pure, that his name is known as a good name. And then it's interesting because it takes a turn. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, many of you know other translations say the valley of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and staff comfort me. So it's interesting here because it's saying that he's guiding me, but then he's with me and leads me through a darkest valley, a valley of death. So that means that God allowed me or guided me into a dark and intimidating, a fearful place. And then he even kind of boasts about it a little bit. And, you prepared a table before me in the presence of my enemies. And so what does God do in the most difficult place when everything is surrounding you and you're intimidated, or your enemies are crowded and around you and ready to pounce? God says, let's eat. That's just completely contrary to the way that we react as human beings. We want to beat feet and get out of those situations. And so God is still there. He's with us, even though the circumstances and the situations aren't the best. In fact, walking with God actually will be a very frightening thing. I think that's why we're tempted to be in religion and not be in a relationship with God, because we know that God is very good, but he's also dangerous. He'll put us in places, again, that we don't really want to be in. And so I'm going to read, this is in my devotion this morning. I'm in Luke chapter 2 at the birth of Jesus. And there's this incredible situation where the angels come and announce the birth of Jesus Christ, the Messiah. And in Luke 2:10 it says, "But the angel said to them, 'Do not be afraid. I will bring you good news that will cause great joy for all the people.'" So that's their purpose. It's not to come and tell them not to be afraid. Their purpose is to bring good news that will cause great joy for all the people. I think that's the situation that we're in. See, it's interesting. The angels, the reason the shepherds, let me put it this way, are afraid is because all these angels have showed up and they're an angelic army. And so they're fierce looking. And so of course they're losing it. So the cause of their fear is the angelic presence. And so, but the message is that even though this is a fearful event that God has obviously brought these poor shepherds into, there's great news. And what's the great news is that a Savior is being born, that is Christ the Messiah. And so what we have to realize is that we're in situations all the time where we can either allow fear to dominate and take hold, or we can put our boots on and start saying, "God, where are you taking me?" And even if he tells you to sit down and fight that spiritual warfare, how do you fight? According to Psalm 23, you eat. It's kind of dangerous for us who are stuck inside right now. But we're in that situation. What's making us safe is God's presence. It's not the way he's taken us. That doesn't make us safe all the time. It's not the way he's even showing himself and his glory and even his protection, to us. That also can be misunderstood and seem frightening to us. What makes us safe is knowing that there's good news to be found. I'm going to tell you just a couple of stories about me being in really desperate circumstances and learning how to try and go where Jesus was pointing. And some of these stories are familiar to you. Many of you know Jose Vasquez. I told this story a few weeks ago about how he had a heart attack, a cardiac event. And I don't want to go into all the details, but it affected his lungs. And when I came to the hospital, he was supposed to die. And I sat there and cried with his wife, and I just sought the Lord. And finally, when I just found the smallest bit of faith, I said to Jose's wife, "We need to pray right now, and we need to plan your next vacation with Jose. Let's assume that we can pray, and God will answer, and that he's going to be better so much that you can take a vacation in just a little bit." Again, I don't want to go into all the details, but coming the next day after expecting Jose to possibly die that night, but certainly take a long time to recover, I found him completely fine up in his hospital bed, and he was released just a day or two later. It was absolutely amazing. I think of Ryan, who was skateboarding and literally cracked his head open and had a severe concussion, and they said it was going to take days for him to recover consciousness because he was in an induced coma, and that it could possibly take him a very long time to walk, if he could ever walk again. And being there with his family and saying, "What do you want to ask God for?" And they said, "We want him out before the end of the week." And so we prayed. I can't remember what day it was, but we prayed that he would be out before the end of the week, and he was released from the hospital on Thursday. It was amazing. I think of Jenny Garcia, who was going through a terrible time of cancer. She's in this dark place, and God healed her of a type of cancer that you shouldn't be able to come back from. So what does that tell me? It doesn't just tell me, don't be afraid. That's not the message. The message is that through Christ, there is good news for us, no matter where we're at. And so I just want to give you an assignment that you would pray and press in for the revelation of the moment. Where is God's great news, his best news relevant right now? And that you would even pray God-sized prayers. So if you're going by someplace and they're all shut up, and maybe it's your favorite restaurant, or maybe you just have a heart to pray, God, let that business survive. Let it come back and thrive. Call up people and pray the biggest, boldest prayer that you can think of, even if it seems a little bit silly to you. Remember how good God is, This is the place that we're exploring right now, of how he can be good and even be great news at a time like this. All right, everybody. Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you, give you his peace.